I'd been hoping for the chance to speak to Sara Mastros for a while now. And then, the unthinkable happened. Okay, well, not really the unthinkable. She just made a Facebook post saying that she wanted to do some podcasts. What a crazy random happenstance. So, of course, I jumped on the opportunity, and while we were working out the details, Sara asked if she could bring her friend and collaborator, Marco Felgueiras, along for the conversation. What can I say? I was only planning on doing 9 episodes for this season, but sometimes you just gotta do an extra. So without further ado, I now present to you this special bonus episode of M3. Welcome to Music, Myth, and Magic. I'm Eric Arcadian, and today I am speaking to Sara Mastros and Marco Felgueiras. Guys, thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I kind of told you just in our pre-interview section that this is my first time doing an episode with more than one person. So usually I do the introduction, but in this case, since there's 2 of you, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you tell everybody a little bit about yourself. Sara, if you wouldn't mind going first.
My name's Sara Mastros. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I am a degenerate with no real job. I mostly write and think and teach about witchcraft, and inexplicably people sometimes give me money for that. In non-professional capacities, I also am really interested in like permaculture. And recently I've been drawing a lot of maps of the other world. It's a thing I'm into right now.
Very cool. What about you, Marco?
Okay, so I'm Marco. I'm from Lisbon. I'm based in Lisbon. I'm in Portugal. I'm majored in translation. I speak several languages. That's all I'm good for is speaking. That's why I'm a tarot reader. And I'm also a practicing witch, and I've been reading for about, 3 decades or so, ever since I was a teenager. I was meant to be a fortune teller. And that's the gist. That's the thing that I do. Among other things, but mainly that's what I'm mostly known for.
Awesome. Thank you guys for introducing yourselves. And we'll keep this next question short, because I know you said you answer it all the time, Sara, but you did say you have a fun anecdote about when you were 8, and now I have to know what the anecdote is. So what's kind of the background of how you got into the occult?
So when I said 8, I don't know, somewhere between like 8 and 10 probably, my largely estranged grandfather sent me a birthday gift. It was not actually my birthday. Again, he didn't really know me. But he sent me a birthday gift, and it was like a mail order book catalog. And so for young people in the audience, like, this story is set in 1987. And so, like, it's not that easy to get books, especially where I live, which is not like in a big city, right? Like, the books I have access to are the ones at my local library and the ones at like not even a Barnes and Noble, some other chain bookstore, perhaps, that I don't think exists anymore, right? So he sent me this mail order book catalog, and there in the nonfiction section, and like a gift certificate. And in the nonfiction section, there was a section called witchcraft. And I knew what nonfiction meant. That meant it was real. And I was very excited because I had always known. And I was like, Mom, can I get a book on witchcraft? She's like, yeah, but it's going to be disappointing. And like, she was partly right. It was definitely not all I wanted from it, but that's sort of like how I started. So I think a lot about it as not like, that's not when I started doing witchcraft. Like, I was already talking to trees and ghosts and, I don't know, doing witch shit. That was when I found out other people were also witches.
I think if I had found a witchcraft section of a bookstore when I was like 8, I would have been terrified. I would have not known what to do. But that's because I was raised so Christian. I just would have been scared to death that I had found my way into something that was going to get me in trouble. Marco, what about you?
Okay, so I have a witch origin story and a fortune-telling origin story. So I have a Catholic upbringing because being from Portugal, what else? There's not a lot of other flavors, but Catholic magic is very present. So working with the Mighty Dead, with saints, and people doing actual witchcraft, punishing saints, burying them, putting them underwater is quite currently. Tying the devil's tail to a chair is quite common. My mother would do that to find lost objects. So doing acts of small magic, of folk magic, was something that I was brought up with. And I also remember being a very, very small child and watching Bewitched on TV. Everything that influenced me was television. And I wanted my grandmother to be Andorra. And I even told my grandmother, I was like, why can't you wave your hand and make shit show up? And she'd be like, that's TV. And I'm like, ugh. Like I didn't, and she wouldn't even bake. It's just like, I don't have the cool grandmas on TV. She doesn't bake. She doesn't cook. She doesn't do shit. She doesn't do magic. So it was common for me to see the women in my family do certain types of rituals and spells. So it was normal. For the card reading, when I was 6, there's a Japanese animation show called Candy Candy, in which around early on in the season, she and her paramour go to see a fortune teller who predicts his death. And she kind of like shuffles the cards, send them away, doesn't tell him he's going to die. You, of course, the audience, know he's going to die because the death card is there. And I was just fascinating looking at it. And I remember vividly going to my mother and saying, Mom, I'm going to know how to do this one day. And my mom was like, yeah, sure. Of course you are. And later on, when I was a little bit older, my mother, we used to go to a classical fortune teller who read playing cards, but I used to be kept in the parlor. I wasn't allowed to see. And, my curiosity of seeing it. So it's very common where I am from for people you either know a witch, you've gone to a witch, or someone in your vicinity has gone to a witch. It's really, really common. So basically, those were my two main influences. And Portugal in the mid-70s came out of a fascist regime. We didn't have a lot of access to books, especially translated books. However, one of the things that baffles me is like the Book of Saint Cyprian, which is quite popular in the US. Like Saint Cyprian had a huge boost in popularity in recent years. When I was 13, you could buy that book on bookstores, and kids would take it to high school. And there was this myth that if you read it, backwards, you would go insane or you would get possessed by the devil. So I read the Book of Saint Cyprian and I was like, this is gibberish, because like you'd sew a toad's mouth and so on and so forth. So I was always surrounded by magic in one way or the other.
Thank you for sharing that about yourself. And a minute ago, you said you speak 7 languages?
Yes.
So what languages do you speak?
So Portuguese, English, French, Spanish, Italian, German, and Japanese.
Wow, that is really impressive. And then obviously tarot counts as your eighth, right?
Tarot is a language.
Yeah. So how did you guys meet? How did you connect? And what did you connect for? What are you working on?
I think there's 2 stories to this. The first story was that Sara was doing her Kickstarter
That's
for
true.
the Orphic.
There's this whole story I always forget about.
She always forgets about this. She was doing the Kickstarter for the Orphic Hymns grimoire, and I saw it, and I said, because I'm very Hellenistic, I love Greek mythology ever since I was a kid, and I was like, that is so cool. And I was immediately enthralled by the project. I wanted to back it up. And I don't know, my tier was I got a reading with Sara. And so that was my first time meeting Sara. We talked. She gave me a reading. She was very, very accurate. And then we basically connected over Facebook, and we kind of like I mostly commented or liked stuff that she posted, and then she forgot about me for a couple of years because she's
Sorry,
surrounded by a lot of people.
I'm not very good at connecting like people I only know on the internet with the real world. So the truth is, like, until I meet people in person, I'm not great at like remembering they're a real person in the real world. Sorry. But then last
Yes.
summer, we both did an event in Italy, right? Where Marco actually got subbed in relatively late in the process because the person who was originally going to teach divination couldn't come. And so like it got swapped out to Marco. And we were both up really late all the time. Like there was a small group of us who were the people who were just up late, and we really just like bonded a lot. And we've been friends since then.
No. I think our record was 6 a.m. that we went to bed at one night. I think so.
Well, that's a fun story about how you guys met. So what have you been collaborating on these days?
So we have been collaborating on a super secret project we are not allowed to tell you about, but you can watch for updates. We actually are going to announce it next month. I can say that it is a live in-person event in September called The Witching Hour. But I think that's really all we're allowed to tell you for now. But if you watch either of us on social media, you'll get to hear more about it. And then we're launching a tarot class together that starts actually a month from today. So the first lesson will be January 19th. I know it's probably later when you guys are listening to this.
So there's one super secret collaboration that we can't have any details on. We just watch for. And then there is another collaboration that is the tarot class that starts in January. Can you tell me a little bit about the tarot class and what type of topics you're going to teach there?
Yeah, so it's for people who aren't necessarily like total beginners to tarot. Like maybe they've been playing around for a while by themselves, but we're calling it the Devil's Picture Book, Getting Good at Tarot. And that's really the focus, right? Is that like so people have some kind of facility with it, but this course is really about turning people from like beginner tarot readers into being good at it, right? And sort of the like gimmick of the class basically is that you get both of us teaching, and we actually read in like different styles. So you can sort of triangulate between them, right? Because I think a lot of times when you only have one teacher, it's really easy to think that like that's the one true way to do things. But so you're going to see everything from these two different viewpoints, and additionally with two different decks. So I'm going to teach Smith, Rider, Waite, and Marco's going to teach Marseille.
Can you tell me about a little bit about the differences between the two decks?
Yeah, I'm going to let Marco take that.
Okay, so Marseille is basically originated as a game, as a parlor game in, I don't know, the 1600s, 1500s. In Italy, it was given as a gift. It was given as a gift only for very rich people who could afford people to manually paint it. And then later on, in the 1700s, it became with typography broader, but it still was a game. So basically, what people now call the minor arcana, which is a term that basically came in the not the westernized, but the English-speaking people of the world call the minor arcana, were the Spanish and Italian pips or symbols of the playing cards, which are batons, which are like wands, spades, which are curved, cups, and and coins. Okay, so basically, there are no illustrated scenes for what people today call the minor arcana, which are basically just pips that go from aces to tens, and have the court cards in the middle. The jacks, the knights, the kings, and the queens. And then you have all those, what they call now the majors or the major arcana, that are allegoric Catholic or Christian figures of what I like to see as a transcription of society, of what man can act on, what he is a consequence of his actions and what is above him, the luminaries like stars, the moon, the devil, the tower, and so on and so forth. And it became a fortune-telling tool because, and here is where the origins are kind of blurry. People say that Romani people started reading with playing cards, and then it evolved into tarot, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is the Marseille deck. So the minors basically have no pictures. They only have the illustrations of the coins or the swords or the cups or whatever. In the Smith-Rider-Waite deck, basically the novelty was to illustrate every single minor into a scene that translated the meaning of that card. And we have to bring this into a Victorian England where occult was in fashion. Everyone was fascinated by the occult. Everyone loved the occult. And so a housewife could buy a tarot deck and read from it because it became so much more accessible. Instead of looking at, 7 coins and 4 cups, she would look at, some people giving coins to other people and a guy sitting in a tree with 3 cups at his side and a cup being handed to him by a wind in a tree. And it basically is a layout of build your own comic kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So that's basically it seems that I'm like oversimplifying it, but it's the difference between the two decks, but they read exactly the same. If you ask the same question to the same 2 decks, and if it's a competent reader, they will give you the exact same answer. Mm-hmm. There will be schools of thought that there will be people that say, oh, tarot is not for mundane questions. I don't give 2 shits about that. I mean, I can ask, if someone comes to me and say, will I be able to screw my next door neighbor? I will answer that question. I don't care. I don't judge. If they can ask me, will I be able to scam my boss and take money from my company? I don't really care. Other people will say, oh, it's for evolution of the soul or Kabbalah or whatever. Fine, it's your flavor. Do your thing. That's why I usually say I'm a fortune teller and I read fortunes and I see probabilities and paths for the future as it is now. And if you follow this path, this is where you're going to be at. And the odds are that this is what you're going to find and that these are the people that you're going to find. Most likely because people come to fortune teller. No one comes to a fortune teller because their life is great. Mm-hmm. People come to us when their life is, or their life is shit, or their work is complicated, or they don't have money, but they always have money for fortune telling, which I find fascinating. Or they have health issues, or they have money issues, something. It's always something, and it's always about people and the relationships about people. So the thing about, I've never had someone say, my life's going great. Tell me what's coming next. So I'm waiting for that querent to show up. And when they'll show up, I'll read them just the same. But I always tell this story, which is someone came to me and said, I have a new boyfriend. Things are going great. He loves me. It's fine. Everything's fine. And the minute you hear that, if you are a reader with a good years of experience, you're like, then why the hell are you at the card reader if everything's fine? Mm-hmm. Something's not fine.
Well, that gave me lots of things that I was thinking about there while you were explaining all that. And I think my biggest follow-up question to that is kind of split into 2. Because one, Sarah, when you were talking about kind of the overview of the course and reading in different styles, I'm wondering kind of like what the different styles are. And number 2, Marco, when you're talking about reading a deck with no pictures or with very limited symbols on the cards, I'm very visual. You know, when I go to read tarot, I'm looking at a lot at the pictures. So how do you handle reading a deck with limited visual information, and kind of what other styles of reading might play into that as well?
Okay, Sarah, you
So
go
let me
first.
let me start by talking about like the two different styles. So I would say that some key differences are, I think, one, Marco is more inclined to read like one big tableau with a whole lot of cards, and like one big question, whereas my instinct generally is to take a question and sort of split it into smaller questions and do like a series of smaller readings about it. I also think that, and this is partly about the nature of the two decks, right? So I think like, while he's going to teach Marseille and I'm going to teach Smith Rider Waite, I mean, I think we do both read with, like, I prefer the Smith Rider Waite and he prefers Marseille, but I do read both, right? So some of the differences in style, I think, are about the deck, right? So like Rider Waite, it's not only full scene illustrations, but the illustrator, Pamela Coleman Smith, was a set designer for the theater, right? And so when you think about the illustrations specifically as like theater sets that sort of interchange in this play that the cards are storyboarding, like there's a lot more of that sort of like crisscrossing type of like visual pattern. So you look at the cards and you're like, oh, well, this person's looking at that person and this person is handing something from this card to that card, right? Whereas when I read Marseille, because I also read Marseille and playing cards, right? There, you look more for like sort of numeric patterns and like how the suits lay out in a tableau. And I think you get a little more, in some ways, because you're getting less from the, like each card means more like the same thing every time, right? Whereas, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Marco, but I think for me, like, if I'm reading the Three of Swords, right? Like, I do expect that to be a betrayal of some sort. Like, the cards do have meanings, but because they also have these pictures, I think sometimes, like, the way I think about it is that, like, I'm asking a question of someone or something, right? And is being answered, but our only mechanism for communication, like, our language that we share, it only has 78 words. So sometimes it's going to like deviate from the normal meaning of the card to like some other thing it's trying to communicate with a card. And just because they have the full scene illustrations, I think I read more of that because I read those kind of decks. But like conversely, I prefer those sorts of decks because I like that kind of reading more, I guess I would say. Whereas I would say that Marco is a more traditional reader and I am a more wackadoodle occult revival reader. But I don't know.
Okay, so pick up on your topic of how do we guide a scene without no illustrations. So first you have to think about functions. So if you go to the very core of things, you use cups to celebrate and to feast and to be happy and to represent joyous occasions. You use coins to trade. Coins are also metal, so they're conductive or of electricity of thought for me. So for example, for someone of the Waite Rider Smith will think of swords as thought. For me, coins are thought because neurological impulse goes through coins because they are made of metal. Swords are pain, and with wands and with wood, you build things, you create things. So these are the four functions of these suits. And then I ask a question and I will lay them out. If I lay a big tableau of, I don't know, 13, 14, this is not a big tableau, but a medium tableau of 14 cards, whatever, 13 cards, and I look at it, the first thing I'm going to do is I always take in consideration what's being asked of me, and I go immediately to look what's not there. For example, if you're going to say, I'm going to start this new business, and I want to know if it's going to give me profit. So immediately my eyes are going to be on where are the coins. Mm-hmm. So if I see no coins, immediately there's an indication to me that, if there's a lot of cups, I'm going to say, listen, Eric, you're going to have a lot of fun doing this, but no coins, baby. So no coins. And then I'm going to see where it starts from numerically and where it ends. There's also meanings in traditions in playing cards, like in Russian cartomancy, aces usually are houses, like, for example, an ace of spades is like a jail. Ace of clubs is a court card. The ace of hearts is your home. And so, for example, sixes are always travels that, depending on the suit, they will be either long or short, or pleasant or unpleasant. Yeah. So this is, and maybe they make sense and maybe they don't make sense. If they don't make sense according to the question that was asked, I just discard it. But for example, if you come to me and you ask, how's my relationship going? And I start at a 10 of cups, and then I go through, I don't know, a 4 of swords, and then at a 7 of wands, then I'm going to say, you're going to hit a rough patch. First, because you start at a 10. So there's no way up from a 10 that you can go. And it's really busy. Then a 4 of swords is painful and stale, because usually even numbers are a bit stale. They're kind of like there. They don't move. They're very stable, and there's no progression. There's no pain to them. There's no growth. And then to the 7 because 7s are tricky, there's going to be a lot of work involved into it. There might be a little bit tainted with conflict, but you don't get any more cups. You start really great, but then it worsens. So you either go into conversations or you go into try to mitigate things, but it doesn't really pan out well for you. What I like about playing cards and the pips in the Marseille is that it gives me freedom to create any kind of scenario in my head. One of the exercises that sometimes I give to students is to lay out 40 cards and tell a complete story. In my early days as a reader, and this was a common practice in Portugal, people would pay you sessions, and I don't know, for the first half of the session, they would keep testing you for proving to them that you were a good reader by telling them things they already knew. Now I don't humor those kind of people. Like, sometimes I make fun of them. I'm like, it's your money. I'm like, I usually say, I'm Julia Roberts on Pretty Woman. I'm paid by the hour. I can do whatever you want, but I'm telling you shit, But when I was like 22, 23, and I was like, so what I usually would do was do a layout of 42 cards in lines of 6 or 7, and then read them in sequence. So this goes to this, goes to this, and goes to this. And I would start telling a story. And I didn't know the person. And I said, well, this happened, and didn't you have the fight with this person? And this person showed up, and this is your mother, and this guy came along. And then you wanted to screw your boss, and then something happened at work, and blah, 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 blah. And then you shift time, and you kind of have that inkling on when. And that's the interesting thing about tableaus, is when when there's a shift in the flux of time. And then you go to the present and you say, right now, this and this and this is happening to you. And then in the future, this is what's going to happen to you. And that's when the real session starts. For example, I have 30-minute bookings and I have 1-hour bookings. Very rarely people book 30 minutes. Usually it's for people who have like very quick questions that they want on the spot, like do I buy this car, or do I do this, or do I sell my portfolio to this company? Because I sometimes have, people find it funny, people that come to me and say, how much is my portfolio worth? Will people pay me this? How much do you think they're going to offer? And for example, for this specific kind of reading, I will pick up plain cards because I don't want any pictures distracting my head. I just want numbers. I just want black and red. But also in the Marseille pips, you have flowers, you have leaves, you have all intricacies, and you have negative space. You have busy cards, like you have the 10 of cups with the huge cup on top and 9 cups filling basically all the card. But you might have a 3 of cups, which is like 2 little cups on top, 1 little cup, and then everything else is like void. So you can also read of what's not in the card. And this is kind of a rule of observation. You just this is not a quick draw like kind of game. You just look at the card and you just stare at it. And sometimes my advice is, if you're baffled by your cards, don't draw more cards. It's just going to confuse you even more. It just
makes it worse. Yeah.
Just leave them there. Go grab yourself a cup of coffee. Go watch a YouTube video, drink your coffee, and then go back to the cards, because you'll be relaxed. And then you'll go, oh, that's it. And that's why I prefer the Marseille pips. But I also read, for example, with Lenormand, and Lenormand is full of it's just pictures. Like
one nice thing about non-illustrated pips is, so when you read cards that have pictures on them, the person you're reading for tries to interpret them themselves because they have a picture on them, so they think they know what that card means because it has a picture on it. And I will say, like, one thing I like about Marseille is it does sort of prevent people who don't know what they're doing from reading, which is I was talking with Barbara Moore, who is the tarot editor at Llewellyn, and she said she doesn't even let the clients see the cards. Like, she doesn't even tell them what cards she got, which is fascinating. But it really isn't. And I do it too. Like, Marco, I don't know if when you read for me, I do the same thing. As soon as the cards come out, I'm like, oh, and then I start reading them, even though I paid somebody else to read them. So that is another nice thing about non-illustrated books.
That's interesting. It's also kind of hilarious. So you just try to hide the cards from the client, but Marco, I really appreciate the way you painted that picture of the numbers and your flow between all the numbers. That was actually quite beautiful, hearing how you kind of flow from one to the other. And I'm actually kind of curious on something, Sara, you said a little bit earlier. You said that even in an unpictured deck, the 3 of Swords would always be conflict for you, correct?
I mean, I don't want to say always, but when I see the 3 of Swords, I generally expect some kind of like interpersonal betrayal. So for example, like if somebody's partner is cheating on them, I expect to see a 3 of Swords in that reading.
Is that where is that being drawn from? What about the number 3 for you is that?
Okay, so it's a little bit complicated, like where the meaning of a card comes from. So I will say that, like what I said about 3 of Swords, that's a quite traditional, like if you pick up a random beginner book on tarot, they're going to say that about the 3 of Swords too. So it's a combination of factors, right? One is that swords, as you might imagine, on account of them being swords, do have a tendency to be about conflict. The 3 in particular is often like, 2 people in a romantic couple and a third person. Often, like it's that. But 3 also for me, like, so Marco sort of alluded to this as well, right? That even numbers tend to be quite stable, right? Whereas odd numbers, they're more like dynamic. They're things moving around, right? And sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. In Swords, it's generally bad. Like, I don't always like to assign cards as like good and bad, right? But I say that, but when I'm reading for myself and I see like all odd numbered swords, I'm like, oh dear, it's going to be a bad week. You know what I mean? Like, swords tend to be about conflict. Odd numbers tend to be about like growth and change, but also like the friction that comes along with that. But in this particular case, the threeness is often about like, you know, another woman or another man in a two-person relationship. Like that's just my experience of the Three of Swords. So I think that there's definitely a way of reading pip cards, right? Which is certainly the way I teach beginners, right? That like the suit has a meaning and the number has a meaning, and you just kind of put those together and you get out the meaning of the card, right? And so for me, I will say that that number symbolism is pretty deeply rooted in Pythagorean mysticism. And I actually think that is the case with almost all Western numerology, is that like if you really look at it, it is sort of growing out of Pythagorean mysticism. The Smith Rider Waite deck is specifically designed to match up with a certain formulation of the Kabbalistic tree of life from a text called Share or the Gates of Light. And so like, but that number symbolism of the tree of life actually does grow out of Pythagorean. Like Kabbalistic number symbolism does indeed largely grow out of Pythagorean number symbolism. But you know, the symbolism of numbers is not as culturally determined as many other things, like as numbers are relatively culturally independent. Sorry, I used to be a mathematician, so I could like nerd out about this number stuff for a long time.
No, it's really cool. I was gonna ask if you also pulled from like some other occult sources or other theory, like Kabbalistic correspondences as well with what you do. And it sounds like for you, they're kind of all interrelated. And Marco, it looked like you had something that you wanted to say and chime in there with.
One thing about the Three of Swords. There are some cards in the Smith Waite deck that I hate. One of them is not the Three of Swords because I find it beautifully the way it's drawn.
It is a very pretty card.
But I hate the way people react to it. I've seen people react to the Three of Swords in such a negative way, and then they have the Ten of Swords, which is literally a man stabbed by 10 swords.
Yeah, much worse.
Which is much worse because dead. And they're like, oh, okay. And fine. And I'm like, no, you're not. It's not fine.
I think all of us have had our heart broken, and few of us have had a 10 swords shoved in our back. So I think that's part of it. True. It's like, I know what Three of Swords felt like. I've felt those feels.
True, but I've also read the Ten of Swords is acupuncture, though.
Yeah,
on the context
exactly.
of someone is asking me, like, I have some like their arms were feeling numb and so on and so forth. What can I try? I tried this blank. I went to the chiropractor, it didn't work, and so on and so forth. And in the do position, the Ten of Swords show up. And I was looking at that and I was like, have you tried acupuncture? Because literally to me, it was like a lot of like pins in several areas of the body.
That's what I was saying about how like the illustrated pips, like you get this whole other vocabulary out of the card, where like sometimes the card means something quite different from what it would normally mean, right? Like the Ten of Swords being acupuncture.
I've never thought about it that way, but I love that. I love kind of the different perspectives you guys are giving on some of the cards and some of the numbers. It's always really interesting. You can learn a lot by just hearing how someone else sees a number or a picture. And then the next time you go to read, it might mean that thing for you. It's just kind of adding to the language and how you can speak the language. And if we're going to talk about the word language, language always makes me think of music because, you know, music is a language to me. And I'm curious how you might see some tarot and musical connections.
Do you want to go first, Michael?
I mean, for tarot, I don't use music a lot. I mean, it's embedded in pop culture a lot with tarot and music videos and in a lot of songs. I do use music in my practice. I'm an Umbanda practitioner, so there's a lot of people chanting and rhythmic drumming, and they are the ones who are holding the ritual space. I mean, yes, we are channeling entities and we are doing the work, but without those people who are doing the rhythmic drumming and setting the space and setting the pace of the ritual and actually telling what is going to happen, because those songs have meanings and they're telling, basically it's now these guys are going to come in or these people are going to come in, and then they're going to, like, it's like praising their epithets in a way. It's kind of like, now they're doing this or now they're doing that, and they are known for this and they are known for that, and they keep doing it. Like I did one yesterday where I was for 4 hours, and there was a group of 5 people who for 4 hours were drumming nonstop and singing nonstop to the, at the top of the loudest they could, even with microphones. And if you think about it, that is amazing. And without them, it would be impossible to keep that amount of energy. Plus, with people clapping to keep the beat, to keep the things going, because in Afro-Brazilian magic, the beat, the drumming, the singing is very, very important to actually raise the energy levels. And at a point, and it's almost winter, and we were in a basement, my body, when I came to myself, my hair was damp with sweat because it was so hot in the room. Such was the level of energy that was raised. But also when I was more of a solitary witch practitioner, I also used to do, that chant, which is very common known, like, which is going through the goddesses' names, I don't remember it now. I had it in the back of my tongue, like Isis, Astarte, Diana, Hecate,
Demeter. Oh, yeah.
And I would go it over and over and over again. It would be something that puts me into a trance. I like rhymes a lot. I like things that, like Victorian rhymes. And I think that's why I think I like Bewitched, because everything rhymes and they're so silly. And usually sometimes, because I'm very vocal witch, I also like to say things that rhyme. So usually not in tarot, although my voice kind of sometimes shifts into a different tone when I'm doing readings, but I don't use music or background music because I find it, to me, distracting. But in other settings or in other practices, yes, I will use it.
Yeah. So honestly, I agree with most of what Marco said. Like I don't use a ton of music with tarot because, again, I do think, because you're just talking most of the time, you end up talking over the music with tarot anyway. I'm like deeply unmusical, right? Like I have a bit of an auditory processing disorder and I'm kind of tone deaf, but I always end up in covens that are like my coven is half professional or quasi-professional singers. Like I end up with a lot of, I don't know why, right? So a thing that I definitely hear people talk about a lot that like I think is an interesting exercise for people, particularly for people who are like really into pop music, is that just sort of like, what song do you think of as each card? And I think that can be really like illustrative about learning the cards. But I agree that like in other kinds of magic, I think of music as a like much more fundamental piece of the magic. And for me, like Marco was saying, it like starts with being about rhythm, right? And so like a rattle or a drum, or like I use a lot of pre-recorded drum tracks for certain kinds of trance work. And I will, just to like underline what Marco said, like as a person who leads big group rituals, especially when it's a group of people, like you're at a festival or something and not everybody knows each other, like a drum is really the only way to keep everybody on the same energy vibe or whatever.
Frequency. Yeah.
We're saying, yeah, exactly, on the same frequency, right? And like a drum, especially a really quality drummer. Like I've done a lot of rituals with a lot of drummers, and sometimes it's kind of hit and miss who you get as a drummer. But I recently did a ritual with like some really amazing like ritual drummers who did taiko, which is a kind of, I think, Japanese ritual drumming is like what they were trained in. And like a good drummer really brings a ritual together. But I also use a lot of like ambient sounds, right? So like the sound of rain or like the sound of the ocean. And then like sort of weirder variations of that. So I'm just going to say there's this website I love. This is not like an advertisement. I have nothing to do with this website. It's called mynoise.net. And it's just like hundreds of recordings of those that you can animate and play with and move into different keys and different tempos. And I experiment with that a lot. So something you'll see if you're in my courses or you read my books, sometimes like individual pieces of Magick, I'll be like, okay, listen to this noise. Right. And I will say my very favorite, like magical trance noise is I have this big metal mixing bowl that I put in the dishwasher. And it's like an amazing trance noise. So there's like a whoosh noise from the dishwasher. And then like a steel drum kind of tinka, tinka, tinka noise as it hits the bowl, plus like a rain noise. It's amazing. And I said that once on Facebook, and my aunt was like, oh yeah, your mom used to like put you on top of like she would put your baby carrier on the counter on top of the dishwasher to like get you to sleep as a kid. That was fun.
That's cool. You should make a recording of that noise next time you pop it in there and share it.
Oh, that's a good idea. I will try.
So, those are really cool ideas, how you guys have incorporated a bit of music into your practice. And maybe I will kind of just touch back to this topic at the end. Not necessarily just music, but any form of sound or frequency, vibration, intonation in your practice. But I do want to just jump topics a little bit because,
Sure.
Sarah, you had the Orphic Hymns book at the beginning. You were showing off, right? And I was hoping maybe you could share one of your favorites with us.
Oh, let's see. Favorite, huh? It's a good one for this. Sorry, I know I was supposed to pick one in advance. And okay. All right. This is one of my favorites. This is Hermes, right? Ooh, I just got new bifocals and I like don't know how to read with them. Like I got them yesterday. I sing of high Hermes, beloved worker of wonder, first Pleiades conceived when she dreamed of bright thunder, all-powerful game master, lord of the dead, true-thinking foreteller of what lies ahead, code-cracking con artist, jail-breaking the shibboleth, killed peacock-eyed Argus when you bored him to death, wing-sandaled human friend, fast philanthropic prophet, rejoicing in racers and instructing pickpockets. You spin hermeneutics like you're spitting hot rhymes. You're the father of fraud, rearing up lies. But that same trickster offers genuine peace. Blameless, irreproachable machine of surcease, Corsian luck-bringer, blessed loquacious one, comrade of the worker and those under the gun, employing clever rhetoric, venerable friend, pray for your initiates when our lifetimes end, boast about our work and our charismatic rhymes, memorialize our memories for future lifetimes. So that is a relatively loose translation, right? Translating, Marco is a professional translator, so he definitely knows this. Like, translating is always like a complicated and fraught thing to do, right? Like, things change meaning when you translate them. And so much the more so when it's magic, and so much the more so when it's poetry. So sometimes people ask, like, oh, is that a literal translation? I'm like, I don't think you know what poetry is. But, I mean, most of the Orphic hymns, my translations are literal enough in the sense, like, if you read Greek, you can see, like, line by line where each thing came from. That's actually the least literal one in the book. It so sort of diverges into the delightful realm of what I think Hermes should be, that there's like a banging noise. That there's also a slightly more literal translation, but that's my favorite one. That's my favorite one. One thing I think is interesting, if you look through the book, I think you could guess which gods are my favorites and which aren't by the quality of the poetry. Like, some of them are better than others. I have a type.
So it's an interesting perspective that you both must have on taking something in one language and adapting it into another. And I have heard, I can't remember the exact phrase that I have heard before. It's something along the lines of when you translate, you destroy.
That probably comes from a Italian saying, which is Traduttore, Traditore, which means translator, traitor. Because you can and actually have. Should I tell this story? Maybe I shouldn't tell this.
Yes.
Story.
You should tell it.
I should tell it.
If you're questioning.
Edit it out if you think you should tell this story. So when the former and now future Vice President of the United States, Donald Trump, visited the Vatican, the translator who was translating things from and to Italian and into English had to heavily edit what the future president of the United States was saying in order to avoid a series of, diplomatic incidents, because probably he was not being as soft-spoken in front of the Pope. Of course, the Pope speaks English, but the other cardinals and the other bishops who were there didn't. But and the translator felt kind of really uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of editing involved around it because they felt really uncomfortable doing it. I don't know if I should tell this or not, but hopefully. And this is something that for example, but this is a personal story. Like at work, I work for a Swiss company, and they're not known for their perfect English. And when I got there, people thought I was really rude because of my English. And they thought I was really rude. And they complained about me. They formally complained to my manager saying, that new guy you got as a manager is so rude. And then they sent the higher up an email, and she was like, no, Marco is, according to our standards, almost native. And that's how he speaks. That's how he writes. He's not being rude at all. But so the cultural differences are sometimes you have to. Like we have a very well-known Nobel Prize winner who's deceased now in Portuguese literature, which is Saramago. And he barely uses any punctuation. And I spoke with the translator for the American version of Saramago's books. And he said, and this is I'm not shaming the American public, but he said...
That thing you just said about punctuation, I didn't know that. That's not how it is when you read in English.
Yes, and he said, I had to do the choice of put punctuation in it, otherwise people wouldn't get it. Mm-hmm. Because it's extremely complex to read it, even for us. And he said, when I translated it, because I went to a seminar, and he said, I had to put punctuation. I couldn't be faithful, otherwise people wouldn't get it.
So when we talk about translating ancient texts, right, there's even more of this, right? Because like as different as Portuguese and English are, there's a much bigger gap between like say modern English and really any language from the Bronze Age or the Iron Age, right? And so there's all these complex choices you're always making. And so at least in that kind of translation, we tend to talk about like two different ways of doing it, that you can domesticate a text, right? You can take the text and make it seem like it was written in this new language, or you can foreignize a text and really like highlight the ways in which this text is reflecting a culture very different from the reader. And like, I think when you're translating Magick, like that is a really complicated tension between those two things, right? Because Magick in particular, like even when you're reading it in your own native language, and that is the language it was written in, it's still like got all these complicated like word play and shades of meaning and like deep complicated things going on, and like a poetic element where it's about like, at its very essence, right? Like language, but spoken language in particular, it's like shapes we make out of our breath. Right. And so like in Magick and in poetry, the like, and in music, right, the shape of that is sometimes as important or more important than like the like semantic, the actual meaning of the text. And so I really love translation as a like translating Magick is a thing I quite enjoy, but it is like fraught and complicated, and you do have to destroy what you're translating in order to make it new. And that's why I think like, so I would say my biggest piece of advice for people like reading text in translation is to like sort of read more than like, especially like an ancient text or a religious text or something like that, is to read like a bunch of different translations and see where they differ. And like, because a lot of times like the Bible translations are good for this because you can it's very easy to go online and simultaneously read like 20 different translations. And like, usually they'll be the same. And then there'll be suddenly one passage where these different translations appear totally different. And that's a signal that like something really interesting is happening with the language in that passage that like is essentially untranslatable. And so they've all made these different choices about how to do it. Anyway, sorry for that giant nerd tangent.
No,
translation
it's interesting.
Theory. I'm just into that.
A very small spell that was taught to me by my sister, and it's in Portuguese, and it's to find lost objects, but it only works because it rhymes if it's said in Portuguese. So sometimes my English-speaking friends will text me and say, "Please record me that spell so that such and such can appear." And they will say it in Portuguese because they know that if they translate it, it doesn't rhyme. And so it has to be some sort of a mantra to kind of make your brain go void. And you have to go into that thing where you're just repeating that thing over and over again, until you stop thinking. Because the object of the spell is to put the logic part of your brain to stop working and the magic part of your brain start working, and then you go and you just let your hands go wherever they might be. And if you were the last person to touch that object, you will go and reach it. And I cannot tell you the weirdest places I have found objects that if I thought with my rational mind, I would never have gone there. But it's funny that my friends, like from either from Sweden or from the UK or from the US, they will say like, "Can you record this for me?" Because I will use characters that do not exist in the English alphabet, and they're like, "Can you please record it?" And I was like, "Sure, I can record it. It's very easy to say." And so,
can we hear it?
Yes. So, for example, if it is, I don't know, a common object that disappears is like a key, right? So a key in Portuguese is chave. So basically, translated, it's like show up, the key with no head. But in Portuguese is apareça, apareça, chave sem cabeça, apareça, apareça, chave sem cabeça, apareça, apareça, chave sem cabeça. And you go this over and faster, and the beat goes faster, and you go faster, and you go faster. And then at a certain point, you're just thinking about it in your head, and you don't go. And it works for everything. Like, even for cards. Just going back to cards the other day, a friend of mine was like, "Where are my glasses?" And I told her, it's just like, check near your fridge because they're near a grid or a radiator or something. Don't ask me how I got that info. I don't remember the cards I took because I don't. I host a weekly session of reading for people just for fun. So I do hundreds of readings over the years. And the other day, she wrote me and she says, "It was near the radiator, but it was the radiator in front of my hallway, not the one in the fridge." So it was in front of the grid. And she said, but it only appeared when I tried the spell and I was roaming through the house. And she said, "I never would have thought to go there." But she said, "I probably was exhausted, took my glasses out, and they fell there." And so basically that's it. So some things, and my sister, who was a Wiccan high priestess, she was adamant of people doing witchcraft in a language where they were not native. Because she said she was adamant against that. She was adamant against people doing like audio things of languages that they weren't proficient of, because they were like, how can you know that what you're saying is what you're saying?
Yeah, I agree. It makes me, I do it every once in a while. Like Like,
Yeah.
all you do, like, barbarous names and things, right? So,
Sure.
like,
Yeah.
but no, I don't care. Like, I so don't care for it that I taught myself Hebrew and Greek. Because I kept having this Magick in Hebrew and Greek. I was like, but what does it say, though? Like, yeah, I agree with her. I mean, I'm not telling other people they shouldn't do it, but I don't like to do Magick in languages I don't understand. Like, I don't think you need to be native. I don't even really think you have to be, like, fluent. You just gotta, like, know what you're saying.
But you gotta know what you're saying.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I can see both sides of that because I do want to know, most of the time I want to know at least reasonably what the words I'm saying mean, but also I feel the power of the sounds themselves just phonetically and the rhythm and flow that they carry with them that have been repeated over the years by people before me. But I'm curious, have you guys ever, and just one last question on the translation thing, have you guys ever gotten into a position where you were translating something and you felt you could either go one way or the other way, but it was going to drastically change the meaning of what you were doing? And how did you choose between which way?
So I usually choose based on, like, which one I like better. Like, basically, but I honestly, for me, because I'm never, like, live translating, like somebody's speaking and I have to do it right there. So for me, like, the actual answer is I footnote it and, like, write a whole paragraph about, like, what the options are and why I made this choice. And if I'd made the other choice, here's how it would have gone. And if you don't like it, write your own couplet.
For me, I've translated myself. Sarah witnessed that this summer, which was driving me insane.
I actually think that's so much harder than live translating someone else, because you got to keep code switching in your head.
Yeah. Sometimes I would, like, speak in English and then speak in English and people would be like, no, switch, because my brain couldn't differentiate anymore. But maybe the fact that we were going to bed at 5 a.m. was also an issue. Could be. But for example, for many years, I did subtitles for Japanese animation for free. And I would get English scripts because I am not fluent in Japanese. I would love to. I would make a ton of money if I were, but I'm not. So, and I would see the subtitles in English and I would hear the Japanese, and the nuances of the degrees of politeness in English do not exist. Like, for example, in Portuguese, you have polite you and regular you, like the you that you use for your grandfather or your boss or someone who's above you, and the you that you're going to use, like for Sarah or for you, Eric. The Japanese have like 6 U's. And for that nuance to hit, when I was translating them into Portuguese, I was very adamant on not using always the normal you, which would sometimes piss some people off because they were like, oh, why are you so stuffy about this? And I'm like, no, that person is in a different relationship, in a different degree, and I'm giving you a context. Like, I translated the series of The Rose of Versailles, which is set in 18th century France. And so I'm not going to say, like, no one's going to go to the Queen of France and call her, hey, you. No, it's going to be your Highness. And it's not that woman. No, it's Her Highness. So it's very, very difficult. But some people don't like it because they find the language too surfy or too formal. And but again, if I am translating something into a book, I will make a footnote out of it. I think the thing that was the most challenging for me was Europa 51, which was, I think it was a Fellini. That movie traumatized me. It was a Fellini movie. Was a neorealism movie, and it had a lot of Marxist dialogue, and it was like an allegory of the life of Saint Francis, and it had a lot of political dialogue, and I was going insane. And it had to do a lot because you only have so much space and so much time in when those subtitles come in. So sometimes you have to edit because you can only put a certain amount of characters, and even then, the editor kind of like got on my nerves and said, "Oh, you put too many characters," and I'm like, "She's going on an allegory about her son dying," and so on and so forth. And also, I also dubbed cartoons when I was very, very young. And sometimes, because I was dubbing Japanese cartoons, they would say one word, which in Portuguese would be like 4 or 5. So then you would have to make something up. You'd have to make shit up. Or they would say a huge long ass line that in Portuguese would be 2 words. And then you would have to make something up. And as an actor, because the translator most of the times would only translate the script and wouldn't even watch the episode, they wouldn't know, and you would have to make that thing up on the fly. And I was looking at it, I was like, so what will I say in context that's not going to sound weird for this? So it was often what's going to be apropos to what I'm seeing right now.
Well, that's a fascinating perspective that you both have on that, and I appreciate you sharing it. It really makes me both appreciate and question everything I read that's been translated, especially from an ancient language. So
I'll tell you the best thing, if you want to like nerd out about like translation theory, I find a place that, like, particularly as a magician, like if you read people talking about biblical translation, which there is just like a shit ton of, like every Bible, almost all of them, they do have like a little essay from the translator in the beginning about like how they made those choices. And I find that a particularly like, because there's so many different translators and they really like agonize over these choices, that I think is like a particularly like rich strain of thinking on particularly translating like sacred text and magical text and poetic text, right? Like, I don't know that it is clear to people, but like Tanakh, Hebrew Torah is like deeply poetical a lot of the time in a way that is not present in English translations.
yeah, well, even in like, for instance, the Doctrine and Ritual of High Magick, right? There was the original translation by Waite, right? And then the second translation was fairly modern. So I read both of them, not realizing that I was reading the same book over again because the translation is so different. I didn't catch on until about halfway through the book. And I'm like, I feel like these rituals that he's describing are really similar. And then I realize it's the same book. And so it's really interesting how all that different perspective makes such a difference in the information that's being conveyed. And I think there is one of those introductions by the translator where he explains why he made the decisions differently that he did. So that's fascinating. I want to ask you both real quick before I hit you with the signature question and we talk about music for just one more minute. I want to ask you both where people can find you, any types of festivals or things that you will be doing, classes you'll be doing upcoming. Obviously, we talked about the super top secret stuff, but anywhere else, and I'll post links to everything you mentioned in the video description as well.
So the easiest place to find me online is at witchlessons.com. Like, you can get everywhere else from there. Or if you just put my name in quotes and put it in Google, you have to put it in quotes because there are a lot of people named Sara Mastros, and I am not any of them. But there's only one person named Sara Mastros, as far as I can tell, in the world, and it's me. So I'm pretty Googleable. In terms of upcoming events, the President's Day weekend, which I think is February, let's say like 20 through 23rd, something like that. I'll be in Ann Arbor, Michigan at Convocation. And then at the end of March, I think maybe the last weekend in March, I'm not exactly sure when, March, let's say 26 through 30, maybe. I'll be at Sacred Space, which is in like suburban Baltimore. And then I think I don't have anything after that for a while, like until May, in terms of, yeah. I believe that is the case in terms of upcoming stuff. I have Marco and I have this tarot class opening soon. And then I also have 2 other long-term courses running right now, Introduction to Witchcraft and The Sorcery of Solomon, which is like this book, my most recent book, grew out of that course. And you can join those at any time. You get all the back videos whenever you join. So you can do them at your own pace, but you'll also get invitations to all the live lessons moving forward. Which is the same with the tarot class, right? Like there are live lessons and we encourage people to come live, but you also get videos to everything. And for all of my classes, like once you're in the class, you're in the class forever. So a lot of people will take the class like more than 1 year in a row, like the first, which is what I recommend. I will say in terms of learning, just here's like a education tip from a teacher. Generally, like if you're learning a topic, for most people, it is actually best not to go super hard your first time through, but to kind of like read everything and like get kind of a big picture view and then go back and sort of read it again with like all the details. So a lot of people do that in the courses as well, as they take them twice, which I encourage.
Well, you can find me on Twitter at marco.moira, and you can find me on no, it's actually the other way around. Sorry, I'm super sleepy. It's almost 2 a.m. You can find me on Twitter at marco-cartes, or you can find me on Instagram at marco.moire. And pretty easily, if you are witchy inclined and you search me on Facebook, I'm also very easy to find, especially if you follow Sarah or something else. I'll probably be going to pop up. And there's not
That's
a lot
true. If you find me, you could just get to Marco from me.
Yes, because probably the other Marco Felgueiras that you're going to find is my nephew, and he's a lot younger than me. So it's not him. It's not the handsome young man. It's the more older man with a lot of blush.
Okay, well, I will post all of those social links and the festival links and links to your courses in the video description. So if anybody's looking for any of that or a way to connect, all you'll have to do is click. And Marco, I do appreciate you dealing with the time difference. I know it's pretty late for you, but you're awesome for being a trooper and putting up with me this late. So guys, it's time for the signature question. I know we touched on it just a little bit kind of in the middle of the conversation, but I'd like to hear again. How do you guys use sound or music in your personal practice?
So for me, I think of it in 2 separate ways. That I appreciate if I was a music person, I would be thinking about these at the same time. But for me, they seem pretty different, right? And one is I do a lot of like chanting and meter and like poetry, which I do not necessarily think of as music so much as I think of as poetry or even spoken word, or even like sometimes I will like freestyle, right? And then on the other end, I really do a lot, like I was saying, with like ambient trance noises, right? Which started off, the kind of trance journey. When I was taught trance journey, I was taught like a core shamanism kind of method that involves like a quite heavy drum beat. But honestly, like I find that quite heavy drum beat is quite a lot for me. Like I'm autistic and I sometimes like I like feel myself trying to hide from my headphones because it's just like too much. So I really prefer like sort of softer sounds, like, oh, my rattle's upstairs, right? So I really like a rattle. And then like I was saying, I really like sort of animated ambient noises, which started off with things like rain noise, but now I'm into like all these crazy noises, a lot of like evolved electronic ones, but also like the sound of hitting a stalactite with a rubber mallet is a sound that's on that mynoise.net website I was talking about that I'm really into. And then I also like a lot of like ambient music. So when I use music in Magick, it's almost always from Hearts of Space Radio, which what I like is I don't always want music with lyrics when I'm doing Magick, because I find it hard to, like, unless I get lucky and the lyrics exactly match what I'm doing, I find it pretty distracting, right? But Like that's a lot of sort of ambient electronica or like world ambient. And I really like it because it's very curated and like as a non-magic. So they're hour-long radio episodes, basically, right? That you can get online. And they basically like come with a little blurb where like the music nerd tells me like what vibe. It's honestly the way I think about it is he's like, are you high right now? Do you want to close your eyes and go on a magical weed journey with music? Here's the journey that I made this music for. And I find those little blurbs quite useful because it would be hard for me to like construct such a playlist for myself. So I like that they're like very curated. But I know that's like some deep nerd shit.
For me, there's a lot of because for me, voice is very important when I'm doing magic. So I like to whisper. I like to rhyme.
Mm-hmm.
I like to change intonation. But also, I think that music also shifts tone and my own pace and energy. Like there's some types of music, even regular kind of pop music or rock music or whatever, that will put me in some kind of mood or like what is it called? Sorry, my brain now it's not working. Like background music for movies and things like that. That will force my mood to go into a certain place that I want to. I will do that with soundtracks from TV shows or movies or things that I really, really want. And I also like melodic singing with no words. That also sets me into this like transy, ambient, like siren, like Song of the Siren is something that I really, really want. Like I all heard any cover of Song of the Siren that you show me, I will probably love it. I think Chumbawamba's Mary Mary is something that really makes me feel really witchy and really, really bitchy as well, and really witchy and demonic and kind of mean. Because I also think that like the act of singing, because I was in a choir for a couple of years, is in itself a glamour and an act of magic. So that's what you will do. So like even songs like Fever and things like that, you will set the mood. It's not by hazard that people would put some music to get it on with someone else. You know, that in itself is a magic ritual, whether people consciously know it or not. That's what they're doing.
Well, thank you guys for sharing that perspective. I loved hearing all about the music and about tarot and about translating. I know we've kind of run over our time, so go ahead and stop our call here. But again, thank you both so much. I had a really great conversation. Really enjoyed hearing everything you had to say.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It was really fun.
Thank you. It's really my pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
What a great interview. And another big M3 thank you to Sara and Marco for taking the time to be with me on the show today. Make sure you check them out on social media so you can stay up to date as they release updates of their upcoming top secret plans, or maybe head over to witchlessons.com and sign up for a course. All of those links and more will be in the video description below. Thanks for watching, everybody. Please remember to like and subscribe here on YouTube or from whatever platform you're currently watching or listening from. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, or other social media at Eric Arcadian. But if you really want to help support me making more content in the future, please consider checking out my Patreon page. By the way, patrons get access to these interviews before anybody else, along with some other cool content. All of those links as well will be in the video description below. Remember, there's always a way to make music. Until next time.